For 30 years, from October 1st, 1962 to May 22nd, 1992, Johnny Carson sat behind the most famous desk in American television and welcomed the world to his living room. Night after night, 5 nights a week, he opened with a monologue, traded jokes with his sidekick Ed McMahon, bantered with bandleader Doc Severinsen, and then turned his chair slightly to the left to interview whoever happened to be sitting on the couch beside him. Presidents, poets, astronauts, comedians, novelists, and athletes, they all came through Studio One at 30, Rockefeller Plaza in New York, and later at NBC Studios in Burbank, California. But there was a particular category of guests that Carson, a man of considerable self-control, practiced wit, and almost impenetrable professional cool, could never quite fully armor himself against. Beautiful women. Not merely attractive women, not simply famous women, but the kind of beauty that reorganizes the air in a room when it enters. The kind that makes camera operators forget their framing, that makes writers lose their prepared questions, that makes even the most poised host in the history of American television momentarily forget what he was about to say. Carson was a student of human nature. He watched people the way a naturalist watches birds, with curiosity, patience, and an eye for what was real versus what was performed. He understood that beauty existed on a spectrum, that it was not merely physical but had everything to do with presence, confidence, intelligence, and that ineffable quality the French call je ne sais quoi, the thing you cannot quite name but immediately recognize when it walks through a door. Over the course of his 3-decade tenure, Carson encountered hundreds of beautiful women on his stage. Actresses, singers, models, athletes, and royalty. But according to those who knew him best, producers, writers, directors, and close personal friends, there were a handful of women whose appearances on The Tonight Show rose above all others. Women who didn't merely appear on his stage, but who altered the atmosphere of Studio One simply by virtue of being in it. Women who made Carson, the coolest man in television, lose his famous composure, if only for a moment. What follows is a tribute to those women, the 8 whose beauty, presence, and personality Carson himself considered the most extraordinary ever to grace his stage. This is not simply a list of famous faces. It is an exploration of what real presence looks like, what it feels like in a room, and why certain women in certain moments transcend the ordinary mechanics of celebrity and become something closer to legend. Before we arrive at the women Carson considered the most overwhelmingly beautiful, we begin with a woman who represented something he deeply admired, the fusion of incandescent physical beauty with raw, uncontainable talent. Anne Margaret Olsen, born in Valsjöben, Sweden, in 1941 and raised in suburban Illinois, arrived in Hollywood in the early 1960s and immediately established herself as a force of nature unlike anything the entertainment industry had encountered in years. When Anne Margaret appeared on The Tonight Show throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Carson was visibly energized in a way that was slightly different from his reactions to other beautiful guests. With most stunning women, Carson's composure would crack in subtle ways, a longer pause, a distracted glance, a slightly too enthusiastic laugh. With Anne Margaret, the energy was more mutual, more dynamic. She matched his wit. She landed her own jokes. She was, in Carson's private estimation, the most genuinely talented woman he ever interviewed, beauty included. What made Anne Margaret's Tonight Show appearances singular was the electricity she brought to every moment. Where some beautiful women made the studio quiet with awe, she made it louder with delight. Her laugh was enormous and unguarded. Her stories were animated and self-deprecating. She talked about Elvis Presley, with whom she famously co-starred in Viva Las Vegas in 1964, with a warmth that was clearly genuine without ever being indiscreet. She talked about her motorcycle accident in 1972, when she fell 17 feet from a stage in Lake Tahoe and fractured her cheekbone, jaw, and left arm with a matter-of-fact toughness that Carson openly admired. Carson once described Anne Margaret to close friends as the woman who made you forget you were watching television. She had that rare quality of making every person in the studio feel as though she was performing specifically for them. Her physical presence, the red hair, the green eyes, the dancer's body that moved even when she was sitting still, combined with her genuine warmth to create something that Carson found practically irresistible. He was careful around her in the best way, sharper, funnier, more alive. She made him better. Anne Margaret's place on Carson's list was not about a single electrifying moment. It was about a sustained brilliance across many appearances spanning decades, a consistency of beauty, talent, and human warmth that never dimmed regardless of the year on the calendar. Diana Ross first appeared on The Tonight Show in the mid-1960s when the Supremes were ascending to the peak of their extraordinary popularity, and she would return many times throughout the following decades as a solo artist of global renown. Each time she appeared, the experience in Studio One was somewhat different, reflecting the different phases of her career and persona. But one thing never changed: the impact of her physical presence. Ross possessed a beauty that was architectural in its precision. Her cheekbones, her enormous eyes, her dancer's posture, everything about her was arranged with a kind of structural perfection that photographs had always suggested, but that Carson's producers consistently said was even more striking in person. She entered rooms the way important buildings announce themselves on a skyline, gradually, and then all at once. What Carson particularly appreciated about Diana Ross was the combination of her extraordinary beauty with an almost regal self-possession. She never seemed uncertain on his stage. She never searched for words, never laughed nervously, never gave the impression that she needed approval from the audience or from Carson himself. She was deeply, immovably comfortable in her own presence, and that comfort, Carson felt, was itself a form of beauty. Their conversations had a particular texture. Ross was thoughtful and articulate about her music, her career choices, and her evolution as an artist. She spoke about Berry Gordy and the Motown years with the authority of someone who understood precisely what she had been part of. When Carson steered conversations toward her legendary persona and cultural influence, she acknowledged it gracefully without vanity and without false modesty. She understood her place in American music and popular culture with a clarity that Carson found both impressive and appealing. The Tonight Show staff who worked during her appearances have consistently described a heightened professionalism that settled over the studio when Ross was booked. Even among a crew accustomed to working with global superstars, Diana Ross inspired a particular kind of focused attention. Everyone was at their best because she was at hers. In November 1962, a film called Dr. No opened in American cinemas, and within weeks a Swiss actress named Ursula Andress had permanently altered the visual language of popular culture. The scene in which she emerges from a Caribbean sea in a white bikini, a diving knife strapped to her hip, water streaming down the kind of figure that seemed to have been designed by committee in a dream. It was one of those rare cinematic moments that instantly transcended the film it appeared in and entered the permanent mythology of the 20th century. When Andress appeared on The Tonight Show in the years following Dr. No, she brought with her the weight of that moment and something equally extraordinary, a personality that was entirely uninterested in performing beauty. She simply was what she was, without apology, without strategy, without the careful management of image that Carson had grown so accustomed to encountering in his guests. Carson was particularly struck by her European directness. American actresses of that era, even the most confident and accomplished, tended to navigate Carson's occasional compliments with a particular kind of practiced deflection, either the self-deprecating laugh or the gracious acknowledgement followed by a pivot to the next topic. Andress simply accepted admiration as a fact of life, the way someone might accept the weather. It wasn't arrogance. It was something more interesting than arrogance, genuine indifference to the machinery of approval. Their interviews crackled with a kind of honest frankness that Carson found both refreshing and slightly disorienting. Andress had opinions. She expressed them directly. When Carson asked about her famous scene, she discussed it with the calm matter-of-factness of someone explaining how they had made a particularly good cup of coffee. Of course it had changed everything. It was what it was. Life continued. Carson told people close to him that Ursula Andress was one of the very few women who had appeared on his show whose beauty, even across the years of repeated viewings on tape, retained its full force. She had, he believed, one of those faces that cameras simply could not diminish. And she had the personality to make the face more interesting rather than less. There are cultural moments in American life that are almost impossible to explain to anyone who did not experience them in real time. The Farrah Fawcett phenomenon of 1976 and 1977 was one of those moments. The poster, Fawcett in a red swimsuit, that extraordinary smile, that waterfall of feathered blonde hair, sold over 12 million copies and became the best-selling poster in history. Charlie's Angels premiered in September 1976 and was an immediate sensation. And then Farrah Fawcett walked onto the Tonight Show stage, and something happened that even Carson, with all his years of experience, found genuinely novel. She brought joy. Not glamour in the traditional sense, not the smoldering heat of a sex symbol, not the reserved sophistication of a European beauty. Pure, radiant, effortless joy. Carson's producer at the time described it as the difference between opening a window and lighting a candle. Most beautiful women lit up a room. Farrah Fawcett opened all the windows and let the California sunshine pour in. Carson was visibly delighted by her from the first appearance. She made him laugh, genuinely laugh, the kind of laugh that he couldn't quite control, and didn't try to. She was spontaneous in a way that was genuinely rare among Tonight Show guests. Where most celebrities arrived with carefully rehearsed anecdotes and prepared talking points, Fawcett seemed to operate entirely in the present tense, following conversations wherever they led with an openness that Carson found both charming and impressive. What also distinguished Fawcett in Carson's estimation was her total lack of pretension about her own extraordinary success. The poster, the show, the phenomenon, she seemed genuinely a little bewildered by all of it, as though it had happened to someone else, and she was reporting on it from slight distance. That authentic puzzlement, combined with the humor with which she discussed it, created some of their most genuinely funny and warm television exchanges. Carson privately characterized Fawcett as the most life-giving person he ever interviewed. In a career built on managing energy and controlling atmosphere, he found her capacity to simply radiate warmth and delight to be something close to miraculous. The audiences felt it immediately. Even the most jaded members of the Tonight Show crew, who had seen every variety of celebrity come and go, found themselves smiling involuntarily when Fawcett was on the program. That effect, the involuntary smile, there is a famous story about Sophia Loren, possibly apocryphal but entirely believable, in which she is asked the secret of her beauty, and replies that it has everything to do with pasta. Whether or not the story is true, it captures something essential about Lauren's particular appeal. She was a beauty that felt lived in, warm, nourishing, deeply connected to the pleasures and textures of actual human life, rather than the cold perfection of a sculpture. When Sophia Loren first appeared on The Tonight Show in the late 1970s, she was already among the most famous women in the world, a two-time Academy Award winner. She won for Two Women in 1962, making her the first performer to win an Oscar for a foreign language performance, and received an honorary Oscar in 1991, and a genuine international icon whose image had appeared on more magazine covers than almost any other woman alive. Carson met her before the taping, which he almost never did with guests. He believed strongly in the natural energy of a first on-air encounter and was careful to preserve it by avoiding pre-show contact. With Loren, he made an exception. Those who witnessed their first meeting backstage described it as one of those rare moments when two people of enormous personal power recognize each other across the room. There was a mutual awareness, a mutual sizing up, that was both completely professional and undeniably charged. On camera, their chemistry was extraordinary. Loren brought to the Tonight Show couch the full weight of her European sensibility, the directness, the warmth, the unabashed comfort with her own femininity, and Carson rose to meet it. He asked her substantive questions about Italian cinema, about working with directors like Vittorio De Sica and Federico Fellini, about what it meant to be a female artist navigating the competing demands of European art cinema and Hollywood commercial filmmaking. She answered with depth, humor, and an occasional flirtatiousness that made their exchanges positively luminous. What struck Carson most deeply about Loren, what he communicated to close friends in private conversations, was the unity of her presence. There was no gap between the famous face and the person behind it. She was entirely, completely herself, without performance or management or the careful brand maintenance that he had come to expect from celebrities of her stature. What you saw was what she was, and what she was happened to be one of the most beautiful, funny, warm, and intelligent women who had ever sat across from him. He found that wholeness both rare and deeply appealing. When Elizabeth Taylor appeared on The Tonight Show in May 1992, one of the final weeks of Carson's 30-year run, it was treated by NBC as an event of particular cultural significance. Taylor had agreed to appear as a tribute to Carson, whom she had known and admired for decades, and her decision to make the appearance was understood by everyone involved as a gesture of genuine respect between two of the 20th century's most significant entertainment figures. Taylor arrived, and the atmosphere in Burbank changed. Stage managers who had worked with presidents reported feeling something different. Production assistants who routinely maintained their professional composure around the world's most famous people found themselves standing a little straighter. Carson himself, who had spent 3 decades mastering the art of treating every guest with exactly the appropriate level of interest and warmth, not too much, not too little, was visibly affected by her presence in a way that was immediately apparent to everyone watching from a wings. Elizabeth Taylor was, in 1992, 60 years old. She had survived 8 marriages, multiple serious illnesses, a battle with addiction and recovery, decades of tabloid intrusion, and the particular burden of having been considered the most beautiful woman in the world for more than 30 years. None of it had diminished her. If anything, she had become more completely herself with the passing of time, more assured, more at ease with her own legend, more comfortable with the weight of what she represented in American cultural history. Those violet eyes, the eyes that had been written about and photographed and analyzed since she first appeared as a child actress in 1940s, remained exactly what the myths said they were. Carson had always been privately skeptical of celebrity myths, having spent 3 decades watching them constructed and maintained up close. But when Taylor turned those eyes toward him during their conversation, even he acknowledged that some things simply were what people said they were. What Carson admired most about Taylor, beyond the physical reality of her extraordinary beauty, was what he called her comfort with her own gravity. She didn't pretend to be smaller than she was. She didn't perform humility for the audience's benefit. She was Elizabeth Taylor, the last of the great Hollywood goddesses, the final link to a mode of stardom that had essentially ceased to exist, and she inhabited that role with a dignity and assurance that Carson found both impressive and moving. In their conversation, he asked her about the golden age of Hollywood with the genuine curiosity of someone who understood he was speaking with a living archive of a world that had disappeared. She answered with warmth and wit and the occasional wry observation that reminded him, and everyone watching, that behind the legend was a real woman of considerable intelligence and humor. There is a difference between being the most beautiful person in a room and owning a room. Many beautiful people walk into spaces and are noticed, appreciated, perhaps desired. Raquel Welch walked into rooms and reorganized them. The furniture seemed to rearrange itself in relation to where she was standing. Conversations stopped. Trains of thought derailed. People forgot what they were doing and why. Carson encountered this quality for the first time when Welch made her first Tonight Show appearance in 1970, 7 years into his tenure as host, and at a point when he had developed what he believed was a fairly comprehensive immunity to being rattled by the arrival of famous and beautiful people. Welch arrived and revised that belief immediately. What struck Carson first, and what he returned to in private conversations about her many times over the years, was not any single physical attribute, but the totality of her effect. She was not merely beautiful in the way that a painting is beautiful, something to be looked at from a respectful distance. She was beautiful in the way a force field is powerful. You felt it before you fully processed what you were feeling. The studio audience went quiet when she walked out. Not the quiet of inattention, but the quiet of collective held breath. Welch appeared on The Tonight Show multiple times over the years, and Carson's colleagues have consistently noted that each appearance produced a version of the same phenomenon, a temporary suspension of normal professional behavior. Camera operators stayed on her longer than their blocking specified.